Welcome back to F1 Motor Fever Podcast. We're recapping the thrilling action at the Dutch Grand Prix, where none other than Max Verstappen reigned supreme.
Zandvoort. The land of windmills transformed into a land of roaring engines and cheering fans, and it was Verstappen who ruled the circuit.
That's right. Despite the double Dutch downpours, Max, our swashbuckling lad from the Netherlands, clinched the pole position and dominated the race from start to finish.
The rain did play the jester, causing several incidents and even a red flag. But Max in his Red Bull, he donned his Warrior's helmet and fought the elements, didn't he?
Absolutely. And we can't forget about his teammate, Sergio Perez, who was the first to pit for intermediate tires, leading the charge in the strategic battle against the rain.
Then there was Verstappen, still out on slicks, but eventually pitted for intermediates as well. It was a gamble, but he proved his mettle, didn't he?
You bet. Despite dropping down the order, he clawed his way back up, showing us all his grit and determination. Truly a champion's drive.
Especially with the heavy rain and incidents causing a 40-minute delay. The race was restarted behind the safety car, but Verstappen held onto his lead like a true king.
And let's not forget that with this victory, Verstappen further solidified his position as a favorite for the title, extending his lead in the Drivers' Championship. He's on fire this season.
Indeed, it's been a 9-race winning streak for Verstappen, and he's well on his way to becoming a 3-time world champion. An incredible feat.
And what a moment it was for the Dutch fans. Over 100,000 fans, including King Willem-Alexander and the royal family, filling the circuit with a sea of orange.
Truly a historic event for the country, marking the return of Formula One to Dutch soil after 36 years. The atmosphere was electric, the race was thrilling, and Verstappen was in his element.
Such is the saga of the Dutch Grand Prix. Not just a race, but an epic page in the grand narrative of Formula One. Verstappen's victory is not just historic, it's timeless, echoing through the annals of racing. Cheers to that. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the F1 Motor Fever Podcast. I'm your host, George, and joining me today is our resident speed enthusiast and commentator, William. Now, I know some of you are wondering where Enzo is. Don't fret. She's still around. But on Thursday mornings, we mix things up a bit. We delve into the rich, compelling history of Formula One, or as we like to call it, the Thursday Special.
And what a special it is. Diving into the depths of Formula One history, it's like unearthing treasure, isn't it, George?
Couldn't have put it better myself, William Turner. Now, before we dive into today's gem, here's a quick reminder. We're broadcasting on the F1 Motor Fever Podcast channel. If you're enjoying our content, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button, activate notifications. And if you're feeling particularly generous, drop us a comment and share our shows with your friends and family. It really helps us keep the wheels turning.
Plus, it's always a pleasure to welcome more fans into the Formula One family. The more, the merrier.
Absolutely, William. Now, you're probably wondering why we chose today's topic. Here's a hint. It involves a Dutchman, a deluge, and a daring drive in dark conditions. Intriguing enough for you?
Sounds like a tantalizing tale, George. I'm sure our listeners are eager to learn more.
That's the spirit, William. So buckle up, folks. We're about to take you on a thrilling ride through the echoes of Formula One past. Full throttle. All right, folks, let's dive right back in. Back in the early days of Formula One, the Netherlands held a Grand Prix around the beachside circuit of Zandvoort in all but 6 of the first 36 World Championship seasons. But then, Zandvoort disappeared from the calendar as if swallowed by the North Sea itself. And for 30 long years, the Dutch Grand Prix was but a memory.
And despite being a country with a deep-rooted love for motorsport, it took 66 years before the Dutch had a Grand Prix winner of their own. That must have been quite a wait.
Oh, it certainly was. But then along came a young lad named Max Verstappen, and he turned the tide. Once he became a Grand Prix winner, it took another 5 years before Zandvoort made its grand return to the championship.
Quite a comeback story, wouldn't you say?
Indeed, it was. Since 2021, Verstappen has been almost invincible at Zandvoort. He's been first in every competitive session, both in qualifying and the race, for 2 years running. You could say he's made himself quite at home.
And it seems the Dutch fans couldn't be happier. Over 100,000 of them, all decked out in orange, cheering their champion on. Even King Willem-Alexander and the royal family were in attendance.
And why wouldn't they be? Their homegrown hero returned from the summer break with an 8-race winning streak under his belt and an almost unassailable lead in the drivers' standings. Not to mention the chance to match Sebastian Vettel's record of 9 consecutive victories.
That's indeed impressive. So he arrived to a track where he's been unbeatable, in a car that's never lost a race, and just went ahead and clinched pole position by half a second. It's like he's driving in his own league.
Quite right. So as you can see, there was very little surprise when Verstappen defied the double Dutch downpours and sailed to victory. He's not just a champion, he's a force of nature on the track. So folks, stay tuned as we delve deeper into this thrilling tale of Verstappen's reign at Zandvoort. Full throttle. All right, let's pick up where we left off. The race started on a temporarily dry track, with Verstappen leading the grid and the locals already in full party mode. But then, Mother Nature decided to shake things up a bit. As Verstappen and the pack roared off the grid, the heavens opened.
And it wasn't just a drizzle, was it? It was proper rain, the sort that sets hearts racing and throws strategies out the window.
Exactly. What started as a 40% risk of rain had shot up to a 70% chance. As the cars zoomed off, it was no longer a matter of if it would rain, but when it would stop.
And still, the track was far too dry for anyone to consider intermediate tires. Quite a nerve-wracking start, wouldn't you agree?
Definitely. And amidst all this, Verstappen, with Lando Norris alongside him, prepared to start the race from pole position. Behind them were George Russell, Alexander Albon in his Williams, and Fernando Alonso and Carlos Sainz Jr., ahead of Verstappen's teammate Sergio Perez.
And as the lights went out, Verstappen seized the moment. He hit his marks perfectly, leaving Norris behind and taking his line into the first turn. Quite impressive, don't you think?
Absolutely, no doubt about that. But remember, they were racing under treacherous conditions. I can't help but wonder how the race might have turned out if the weather had been better.
Interesting perspective, but isn't the unpredictability part of the thrill? A clear day might have made for an easier race, but the rain brought out the resilience and adaptability of the drivers. It was a true test of their mettle.
That's true, but I still maintain that a clear day would have given us a more straightforward race. In the rain, it's too much about surviving and less about racing.
That's one way to look at it, but I believe the rain adds an extra layer of challenge. It forces the drivers to step up their game to show us what they're truly made of.
You have a point, but I'm not fully convinced.
And that's fine. We don't always have to agree. The important thing is to keep an open mind and consider different viewpoints.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I'll definitely mull over that. Full throttle, folks. Stay tuned for more thrilling insights into the Dutch Grand Prix.
This particular moment reminds me of a childhood memory. When I was a lad, there was this local go-karting track I frequented every weekend. Once, there was a sudden downpour, much like the one in this race. The track was slippery, and everyone was panicking. But my dad, who used to accompany me, just smiled and said, "This is what makes champions. It's not about how well you drive when it's easy, it's about how well you adapt when it's tough."
That's a fantastic story. Sounds like your dad was quite wise.
He was indeed. And it's in such challenging situations that you see true mettle. Like during this race, conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Halfway around the opening lap, the track was already treacherous, and drivers had to tiptoe their way around the tightest turn. It was nerve-wracking, to say the least.
Oh, I can imagine. And amid all this, they had to make a critical decision. Pit and gamble for intermediates or stay out and hope the rain would ease.
Exactly. It reminds me of when I had to decide whether to continue karting in the rain or pack up and go home. Anyways, back to the race. Verstappen informed his race engineer about the rain, which was pretty evident from the images.
And what did his engineer say?
Well, he left the decision to Verstappen, saying that the rain would be short-lived and if he could live with it, he should stay out. Verstappen decided to stay out, but his teammate Perez was more decisive.
That must have been quite a decision to make. But in the end, it's these challenging moments that define champions, isn't it?
Couldn't agree more. These are the moments that separate the good from the great. It brings me back to my father's words. It's not about how well you drive when it's easy, it's about how well you adapt when it's tough. Those words still ring true to me.
They certainly do. The thrill of the race, the unpredictability of the conditions, it's all a part of the adrenaline-filled world of Formula One. Stay tuned, folks, as we dive deeper into this epic race. Full throttle. So, amidst the frantic scramble, Perez decided to box. He told his team, "Shall we box? Let's box." And in he went. Behind him, Leclerc, Pierre Gasly, Zhou Guanyu, Kevin Magnussen, and the two Alpha Taurus of Yuki Tsunoda and the rookie Liam Lawson followed suit. Perez came out with his intermediates 27 seconds behind Verstappen.
And by then, the rain had covered the entire track, hadn't it? The drivers who chose to pit were much quicker in the middle section, almost 10 seconds faster than those who decided to stay out on their slicks.
Indeed they were. Verstappen led the second pit lane scramble, with Alonso, Sainz, and Esteban Ocon following suit. However, Russell, Norris, Albon, Piastri, Lance Stroll, Valtteri Bottas, Nico Rosberg, Lewis Hamilton, and Logan Sargent all chose to stay out on their slicks.
I'm sorry, but I think you meant Nico Hulkenberg, not Nico Rosberg.
Oh, my apologies, folks. Yes, you're right, I meant Nico Hulkenberg. Thanks for the correction.
No problem at all. So after the pit stop, Verstappen found himself behind all these drivers in 13th position, with only Gasly and Zhou, who were also on intermediates, ahead of him. And his teammate Perez, who had already pulled a 13-second lead in 5th place, was just tearing past those who hadn't pitted.
Quite a turn of events, right? Just goes to show how crucial the right strategy can be in a race. All right, folks, let's rev up and explore more of this thrilling race. Stay tuned. By the end of that lap, the entire field had been flipped on its head. Perez had managed to weave his way through the traffic and take the lead, while Zhou, Gasly, and Verstappen each overtook 8 cars to sit in 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Splendid driving, no doubt.
Absolutely. And Russell, who had been bravely holding on, was inevitably dispatched. Perez then had a resounding lead of over 11 seconds over Zhou, while Verstappen trailed his teammate by 14 seconds in 4th.
It's worth mentioning that Leclerc, despite a painfully slow pit stop, managed to claw back to 5th. But his collision earlier with Piastri had resulted in floor damage to his car, which started to affect his performance.
That's correct. It was a tough race for Leclerc. Meanwhile, Verstappen was on a charge. He was aggressive with Gasly at Tarzan, even clipping the Alpine's right rear with his front wing, before briskly overtaking him through the banked 3rd turn.
And he didn't stop there. On the very next lap, he dispatched Zhou in similar fashion, making it a Red Bull 1-2 by the end of the 7th lap.
Even with the team advising them to look after their intermediates due to the looming threat of more rain, Verstappen didn't let up. He was chipping away at the gap to his teammate, taking more than a second out of Perez with each sector he completed.
Verstappen later explained, "I had to close the gap up front. Really shows the mettle of a true racer, doesn't it?"
Absolutely. It's these moments that define champions. Persistence, determination, and a dollop of sheer talent. The race was turning into quite the spectacle.
Well said, the Dutch Grand Prix was shaping up to be one for the books. Stay tuned, dear listeners, as we delve deeper into this enthralling race. But luckily, I think within a few laps I closed down like 10 seconds of the gap, so that was very important for the rest of my race. That's what Verstappen had to say. At this point, the rain had stopped, and the cars were making good progress in drying out the racing line.
The conditions were improving then, so were the drivers switching back to slicks?
Yes, they were. By the time DRS was activated at the start of lap 11, a significant number of cars were switching back to slicks. However, neither Red Bull was among them, until the team decided to bring in Verstappen at the end of the lap.
And how did that play out for Verstappen?
Well, he was able to take almost 3 seconds out of Perez in the middle sector, which saw him leapfrog his teammate when Perez pitted for slicks at the end of the next lap.
Could you give us an example of how this strategy could influence the race?
Absolutely. For instance, take the situation when Verstappen was back in the lead of the race, 3 seconds ahead of Perez, with Alonso now in 3rd. This happened because Alonso was able to undercut Zhou and Gasly as they left the pit lane.
Undercutting, that's a strategic move in Formula One where a driver pits earlier than their rival and uses the advantage of fresh tires to gain a position once the other driver pits, correct?
Exactly. But before anyone could settle into a rhythm for the first time in the race, drivers were once again interrupted from their flow states. There was an incident involving Logan Sargent at turn 7 on lap 15. He clipped the apex curb, and his car seemed to suddenly refuse to keep turning, sending him spinning into the Tech Pro barrier. This concluded his session with a wrecked car for the second straight day.
That's the unpredictable nature of Formula One, isn't it? One moment you're on a roll and the next you're out of the race. It certainly keeps us all on the edge of our seats.
Indeed it does. That's all part of the thrill and appeal of Formula One. Stay tuned, listeners, for more exciting insights into this unforgettable race. Despite the crash calling for a cleanup, the safety car wasn't deployed for over half a minute. Interestingly, none of those in the top 10 pitted, as they had only stopped for tires a few laps prior.
So how did the lineup look behind the safety car?
Verstappen was leading, followed by Perez, Alonso, and Gasly in fourth. However, Alonso earned a 5-second time penalty for speeding in the pit lane during his second stop, a penalty he would have to serve during his next pit.
And what about the restart?
When the restart was declared for the end of the 21st lap, Verstappen really showed his racing prowess. He bunched up the pack through turns 11 and 12, then made his break on the short run to turn 13. Perez, to his credit, stayed closer to the world champion over the restart than many before him had.
How did things look by the end of the first restart lap?
Despite Perez's efforts, he was already out of DRS range of his teammate ahead. Out of the top 14 drivers, only Joe in sixth was running on mediums instead of softs. And with 50 laps remaining and the threat of rain still looming, tire management became a major concern for all drivers.
That's consistent with the last round in Spa-Francorchamps, isn't it? Verstappen spent most of that race being cautioned by his engineer Lambias for leaning too heavily on his tires.
That's a spot-on observation. As the laps ticked down and the threat of rain hung overhead, tire strategy became even more critical. Let's continue our deep dive into this gripping Dutch Grand Prix right after this break. Stay tuned. As Verstappen gently pulled out a gap over Perez, he received much more positive feedback on his tire management. In the 20 laps following the restart, he increased his advantage to 7 seconds.
The front of the pack was separating out, wasn't it?
Indeed, it was. The top 8 cars were all separated by more than 2.5 seconds from the car ahead. Joe, who was on mediums, started to drop down the order. This meant that the top 10 were now all running on soft tires that were at least 30 laps old.
And what about Albon's tire strategy?
Remarkably, Albon in sixth was still on the same set of tires he had taken the start and braved the opening shower with.
But the tire changes were soon to come, right?
Correct. Sainz was the first to pit from 5th place for a different set of softs at the end of lap 41. Over the following laps, almost everyone followed him into pitting for newer rubber, with Red Bull again pitting their driver in second before their driver in the lead.
And what about Gasly and Alonso?
Gasly served his penalty during his stop for fresh softs, crucially rejoining just ahead of Russell on old hard tires. Alonso had a bit of a hiccup during his pit stop, though. A slow left front wheel change dropped the Aston Martin behind Sainz and the yet-to-stop AlphaTauri of Tsunoda.
Interesting turn of events. Guess that's always a risk with pit stops.
Absolutely. The race was really heating up at this point. Let's proceed further into this exciting Dutch Grand Prix, shall we? With Verstappen's lead having grown to 8 seconds before his teammates stopped, he managed to comfortably retain his track position when he eventually came in at the end of lap 49. He emerged 5 seconds ahead of his teammate, Perez.
And how did Alonso fare after his setback?
Alonso, despite his hiccup, quickly got back into the action, swiftly getting ahead of Tsunoda and chasing down Sainz until he was within the DRS range. He made quick work of passing the Ferrari up on the inside at Tarzan.
Can you give us an example of how such overtaking maneuvers could benefit a driver's ranking?
Definitely. Picture this situation. You're Alonso, in a fast car, and you manage to get within DRS range of Sainz's Ferrari. Using the DRS, which increases your speed, you swoop past him on the inside at Tarzan Corner, effectively gaining a position. This helps you in the race standings and could even set you up for a podium finish if you're close to the top 3.
Makes perfect sense. What happened next in the race?
With under 20 laps remaining in the race, all eyes turned to the skies once again. Drivers could see the ominous dark clouds approaching from the south, while their teams all prepared them for an inevitable second shower.
That's some tense situation.
Yes, indeed. We are expecting rain around 10 laps from the end, Max, Lambias warned Verstappen, some of which could be pretty heavy. By lap 59, the severity of the incoming rain was much clearer. The next time around, it had arrived.
How did they navigate through this?
Knowing it was about to get wet, Perez chose to pit the moment he felt the drops hit his visor in the final sector. This led yet another rush of cars into the pit lane. Verstappen, Alonso, Albon, and Ocon all followed suit on the next lap as the rain transformed the circuit in a matter of minutes. It was quite the spectacle. Just to take a moment to acknowledge our source here. A lot of the detailed insights we've been discussing come from an article by Will Wood, published on Race Fans' website on the 28th of August, 2023.
Ah, Race Fans. It's a highly respected site within the motor racing community. Always a pleasure reading content from there, and Will Wood is an experienced journalist indeed.
Yes, he certainly knows his stuff. But remember, even though we have reliable sources like Race Fans, it's still crucial to cross-reference information from various sources, right?
Absolutely. This helps to ensure the information is accurate and unbiased. Anyway, we digress. Let's get back to the thrilling action of the Dutch Grand Prix.
Now, the rain had fallen during other F1 sessions over the weekend, but it seemed the skies had saved their heaviest for last. The pit straight quickly became waterlogged. As a result, Perez slid straight off the track at Tarzan, spinning through 180 degrees into the barrier. Luckily, he was able to continue.
And it wasn't just Perez who had a hard time, was it?
No, indeed. In fact, the same corner claimed Hamilton and Bottas, both of whom also managed to continue. Red Bull were not in the mood to take risks, and they called both their drivers in for the full wet weather tires.
And what happened to Joe?
Joe, unfortunately, had a rather rough time of it. As Verstappen headed into the pit lane, Joe became the heaviest victim of the water on the main straight. He aquaplaned all the way down the escape road until he hit the barrier. This led to the deployment of the virtual safety car.
But the issues didn't end there, did they?
No, they didn't. Despite the reduced speed, Perez still couldn't slow down enough for the pit entry. He ended up bouncing lightly off the inside wall and crossing the white line at just over 60 kilometers per hour, which is over the 60 kilometers per hour speed limit. However, by the time he was heading down the pit lane, the race had been red flagged.
What was Verstappen's take on this?
Verstappen was quite candid about his opinion. He said, "That's a bit silly. Why the red flag?" But Lambias had his reasons, which he was ready to explain. Lambias explained the situation, saying, "Unfortunately, you, Ocon, and Checo were the only people that fitted the wet tire. So then it becomes too dangerous. Nobody wants to fit a wet tire. That's the situation we're in." So, you see, it boiled down to who had the wet tires fitted at the time.
And what was the sequence of events after the red flag was called?
The field lined up in the pit line in the order they happened to be in on track as the red flag was called. Verstappen, who was leading the pack, found himself in the middle. Perez was left stranded by a red light at the end of the pit lane. However, race control announced that the restart order would be taken from the moment the virtual safety car had been called, allowing Perez to take the restart from third place.
Can you give us an example of how this reshuffling could affect the outcome of the race?
Absolutely. Let's say a driver like Perez, who was stranded due to the red light, gets placed in third position because of the reshuffling. This could drastically change his race, allowing him to potentially fight for a podium finish. It's a unique aspect of the sport that can sometimes turn the tables.
What about Joe?
Joe's race had started promisingly, but it ended when he crashed into the barrier. After a delay of 40 minutes, and once the rain had passed, Verstappen eventually led the reordered field out of the pit lane, with all 17 remaining drivers on intermediates. They did 2 laps behind the safety car, after which Verstappen backed the pack up again at turn 11 to prepare for the restart and the final 6 laps of racing.
Did Verstappen manage to maintain his lead?
Yes, he did. He chose to hit the throttle on the approach to turn 13. However, this time, Alonso was much closer to him along the pit straight than Perez had been for the first restart. As the race developed, Alonso put up a tough fight to stick with Verstappen, but he couldn't quite make a move. Perez held on to third place, with Gasly hot on his heels in fourth. However, Perez had a stroke of bad luck. He had narrowly exceeded the pit lane speed limit as he aquaplaned in during his previous stop before the red flag. As a result, he received a 5-second penalty, putting his potential podium position in severe jeopardy.
And Norris and Russell had a bit of a tussle, didn't they?
Yes, they did. They were battling over 7th place into turn 11. The pair made the slightest contact, just enough to leave Russell with a puncture which forced him to pit. This unfortunate turn of events dropped him to the very back of the field.
And what about the final stretch?
Russell's misfortune was the only position change in the top 10 places across the final 6-lap run to the flag. Once Verstappen got the conditions under control, with his intermediates up to temperature, he pulled away from Alonso and steered towards yet another win. In fact, he later explained, saying, "I knew that my first lap the whole weekend already has not been the best with warm-up, so I knew that I had to survive that first lap. Fernando was pushing very hard behind and I could see him close in my mirrors. But once I had the temperature in my tires, it was all well balanced again."
Sounds like a thrilling race.
Absolutely. This is what Formula One is all about. The thrill, the suspense, the victories, and sometimes the bitter losses. It's a sport that truly keeps you on the edge of your seat. Now, Verstappen's victory at Zandvoort was his 3rd consecutive win there, and his 9th straight win in 2023. This race had arguably been his most challenging yet. But with Perez once again unable to match his pace, Verstappen proved that not even adverse weather could threaten his supremacy.
How did Verstappen reflect on the race?
Verstappen admitted, "It was probably one of the more difficult races to win. It's hard, and especially it's easy to make a wrong call or even drop it yourself in the gravel or whatever. So it's never that straightforward, unfortunately."
And what about Alonso?
Alonso, who never really looked under pressure for 2nd place from the restart, was delighted to return to the podium for the first time since the Canadian Grand Prix. He said, "I was quite happy with the race, and it was one of those Sundays where you feel connected with the car, you feel in sync with the car, and everything you do, the car is just answering perfectly."
Perez was 3rd, right?
Yes, Perez crossed the line 1.3 seconds behind Alonso in 3rd. But here's an interesting twist. Gasly, who was comfortably under the 5 seconds he needed, inherited the final podium place with seconds to spare. It was Alpine's 2nd podium of the season, and also marked Gasly's first appearance on the podium since Baku in 2021. Gasly was indeed very pleased with the result, saying, "We haven't been very fortunate since the start of the year. Involved in some unfortunate situations on many occasions, but you've got to keep your head down and always trying to improve what you can on yourself, and today it paid off. Big congrats to the guys and a great way to restart the 2nd part of the year."
And what about further back in the standings?
Behind Perez in 4th, Sainz led home Hamilton, Norris, Albon, and Piastri. Ocon claimed the final point in 10th. Despite the chaos brought by the rain, the gambles by many of the teams lower down the order and the late restart, the bottom 3 teams in the championship were the only ones not to finish with at least one car in the points.
So Verstappen is now closer to becoming a 3-time champion?
Yes, indeed. Verstappen's consistent victories have brought his date with destiny as a future 3-time champion closer. More immediately, he gave the majority of those who had traveled to Zandvoort exactly what they wanted to see for the 3rd straight season. And in just a week's time, he could once again make history in his sport. He said, 9 in a row was something I never even thought about, so very happy with that. Verstappen was thrilled to win at Zandvoort, especially in front of his home crowd. It's always special for a driver to win at home, and even more so when it's your 9th straight win. He said, "But in general, I'm very happy to win here in front of my own crowd."
It's quite an achievement, isn't it?
Absolutely. A win at home is always a special moment, but to do it in such a thrilling and challenging race, that's something else. It just adds to the excitement and the atmosphere. This is what makes Formula One so captivating, the mix of skill, strategy, and a sprinkle of luck. It's a sport that offers up surprises and rewards determination.
And it looks like Verstappen could be on track to make even more history in the coming weeks.
Yes, indeed. With his winning streak and current form, he could once again make history in his sport. For now, though, he and his fans will be basking in the glory of this victory. And we'll be right here, ready to bring you all the action as it unfolds. So stay tuned for more gripping Formula One stories and insights. Thanks for tuning in to F1 Motor Fever Podcast today. We've relived the thrilling races of 2023, the proving ground for Verstappen's supremacy, and the challenges met by drivers like Gasly and Alonso. It's been a riveting journey, and we've learned a ton. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss any episodes. If you liked it, do drop a comment and share our channel with your friends on social media, or even around the dinner table or at the pub.
And I bet you're already wondering what we'll be dissecting next. Well, I can't give away too many details yet, but let's just say you won't want to miss it. So stay tuned every day, and remember, there's a special episode coming up on Thursday morning.
And a huge shout out to Enzo Watts. I have a feeling you'll love this episode. So to all our listeners, thanks for spending this time with us. We truly appreciate your support. We can't wait to bring you more from the thrilling world of Formula One. William and George, pedal to the metal, keep your gaze on the road. Our channel's content is pure gold.